Right, morning everyone. We're back. It's Sarl and Will, and today we are discussing in our critical podcast. We're chatting about microphones, and just reading the words that Sarl wrote down. Sorry, Sarl, I know you're about to jump in there. The first words that you wrote down here, which I think are inspired, are: does music contain energy we cannot measure? Ha! And I can't tell you how much I love that. I think it's just it just surmises, the universal language. Do words contain energies we can't measure? I wonder. But I think there's a deeply philosophical question that we're going to address in terms of physics here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion this morning. And I'll leave it to you. Kick off.
Thank you very much. So for people that has been around, welcome, and for the others, welcome back. My name is obviously Sorrel. You can call me SP for short. And William, thanks again for stepping in and facilitating our little podcast here. Microphones, yeah, indeed, quite interesting. I have on the local South African AV forum, I have had a thread going and a bit of a chat just to get the feeling from a few other people, and this is certainly quite controversial, but we'll dig into lots and lots of that. So indeed, does music, and here I'm referring to obviously live music, not recorded music being played back, but live performances, does it contain more than just the molecules vibrating after they've been excited by the voices and the instruments of the artists? So that's really, at the end of the day, the fundamental question. So there are people that maintain that music contains a vibe or an essence, if you like, which is almost embedded within the music, but not part of the music. It's a difficult concept. People can't seem to define it 100%. The music does have the ability to influence your mood and your emotions, so therefore it must contain something like that. How does it get recorded in the first place, and how does it get replayed or reproduced at a later point in time? And that's really what we are looking at. What is, and hence the reason why we are addressing microphones and talking about the abilities of microphones to be able to see if we can understand on a purely the laws of physics level, is there something that can be recorded and that we can capture to be able to replay it at a later date on demand or not. So to be very, very clear, we are not talking about our individual preferences. Do you like rock music, or do you like opera, or do you like some other type of music, chamber music, whatever it may be, whatever your preferences are? This is not about that. Obviously, if you don't like opera, you're not going to listen to opera, so it's not going to do anything for you. It's the emotional response will probably be a negative emotional response, if anything. But that's not what we are talking about. So we all have preferences for certain types of music, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with it. That's not what we're talking about, however. So it's also not about the reproduction equipment. I'm not saying, can the reproduction equipment relay this mystical entity or not? That's not what I want to talk about. I want to focus purely on live music and what the microphone receives from the live music, because that is what will be captured for replaying at a later stage. So that is what we are focusing about. So it's not about put in different words, it's not about the listener's emotional response to the music. That's not what we are talking about here. Yes, there are emotional responses, and as I've already said, some people will have certain responses to certain types of music. At the end of the day, it's about the scientific and measurable quantities that a microphone can capture and record. That is what we want to address in this episode. So to be able to do so, it is important to understand that it has to be quantitative and it has to be measurable. Otherwise, if we can't measure it and we know what the microphone transducer is sensitive to, and that is pressure differences and pressure variations. That's the only thing that a microphone can capture. There are various types of microphones, as we've discussed. There's one that we haven't even mentioned yet, and that is a laser microphone. So it uses laser beams and the interference pattern of the laser beam and the reflection of the laser beam back that it actually utilizes to be able to record sound. And that is a totally valid way. It's a very expensive way to go about it, but also a very precise way, because light doesn't have, in the normal sense, any weight. So the laser beam is not hindered by the resonance frequencies and things that normal microphones are.
In other words, you're going to have a very uncolored or unneutral, or a very neutral, unbiased recording.
A very, very accurate response of the light beam to the pressure differences that it can sense. Versus a normal microphone, the pressure will take a finite amount of time to move the capsule, the sensing element, and that delay, the laser doesn't suffer from that delay in the first place. And in the second place is it's got an infinite response almost from across all audio frequencies, because the laser light is such a high frequency itself. So there is a saying which goes, we cannot manage or control what we cannot measure. That is fundamental to how science works. Bear that in mind, because it is rather important. It's a fundamental law and it's an immutable fact. We cannot change that fact. We can have an opinion that it's not valid, but it doesn't change the actual law and the fact that this is immutable. If you cannot measure it, you cannot do anything with it. What does a microphone capsule do? It actually measures the pressure differences. And it's the only thing that a Microsoft capsule can do. So anything else is bunk and BS. There's nothing wrong with you having an opinion and me having an opinion, and those two opinions being on the opposite side of this particular argument. There's nothing wrong with that. But if it is only an opinion that you offer, go and check your opinion against the immutable laws of physics. If your opinion runs contrary to that and you cannot offer a scientific explanation or offer something that is reasonable, rational, and logical, I have to discount that from the perspective of what we are discussing here. It doesn't mean that until such time, well, it does mean until such time as you can offer some proof to this opinion, it remains just an opinion. It's not based in fact.
Yeah.
Right. So there is nothing wrong, as I've said. You may have a differing opinion. We're not preventing you from having your opinion. This is not about preventing you from having an emotional response to the music that you prefer to listen to. It's got nothing to do with that. This is not prescribing to you that you have to buy a 100 grand amp and not a 10 grand amp to be able to reproduce the music that you love. We are all different people with differing means. I've got different hobbies. I rebuild old cars. I spend insane amounts of money on machine tools. I spend money on computers. I spend money on photography and videography equipment. And I buy things and the wife just shakes her head and say, "You are mad." Be that as it may, I also buy hi-fi equipment, but I can't buy a 100 grand piece of hi-fi gear. I have to go and buy something else. I've invested the money in a different hobby at a different point in time. So that being said, we are not trying to tell people that they can't have opinions or that their opinions are wrong, guys. Don't mistake this for any of that, because it is not. Also, I can only talk about scientific facts that are known today. It doesn't mean that your opinion even if it is today not backed by a scientific fact, that it might not be backed by a discovery and scientific fact tomorrow. But as of today, as of this recording, this is the best that we've got. And we are now going to start unpacking this microphone business to be able to understand what it can record and what it can't record. Okay, so I don't even know if I should go there, but this opinion business in hi-fi is tantamount to people's opinions, biases, and all of those things when we are talking about spiritual, religious, and political beliefs. Take note the word beliefs.
All mixed into the wondrous world of hi-fi.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
It becomes very difficult as people to separate our emotional responses to music as we perceive them versus the scientific realities of what's actually happening behind the scenes.
The reality in life is just people are going to get cross with us, no matter what. This is controversial.
But as you say, I mean, each to their own. You can feel free to tell us we're talking a bunch of rubbish. We have no problem with that at all.
Yeah.
But it's just a basis of where we're taking these critical podcasts is from what the science is telling us.
Yep.
And I'm finding it very interesting in terms of understanding what it is I'm hearing based on far more detailed understanding of the science behind what's actually happening in the equipment that I'm listening to. I'm not going to say it's changed my opinion terribly much on what it is that I tend to, or how I tend to respond to the music I'm listening to, because that's my emotional response.
Yes.
But certainly it does change my perception a little bit in terms of, that explains why something is sounding the way it is when I'm listening critically. In other words, I'm taking the emotion out of it, and I'm just listening critically. And that's really where this, I think, the power of the series lies.
Yeah. So that's a nice segue, having mentioned the word critically. Maybe it was an oversight on it was an oversight on my side to not define what we mean by critical listening right in the beginning. I should have done that. I assumed wrongly that everybody understands that. And on our local forum, the user by the handle of Air pointed me in the right direction and said, what the heck do you actually mean by critical listening? So the oversight is my bad completely, and I'd like to rectify that right now. So defining critical listening, it is very, very simplistic. It is really critical listening when we perform the listening, the business of listening, not hearing, but the business of listening, with a focus and the intent of excluding any and all external disturbances and things which will distract us from focusing purely on listening to whatever it is that we are listening on. That is critical listening. In other words, that is how we best enjoy the music. Be cognizant of the sound stage, be cognizant of the placement of the instruments, the singers, if there are any, and all of that, to the exclusion of everything else. Now, there is a term that is used which is called flow. Flow happens when you get so immersed in the activity that you are doing, in our case, what we are discussing, critical listening, that you completely forget about the time that has passed. It may feel like 5 minutes when it has actually been 5 hours. That happens. That tells you that this was critical listening that you participated in.
It's the bane of my existence, because it's a case of when there's new equipment to listen to and you've put it into your system, I'm just going to give it a quick 5-minute run in at sort of 9 o'clock in the morning, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon you think, okay, well,
what happened?
What happened?
Yeah.
And it happens all the time, and one of the I mean, we love our suppliers that give us equipment to review dearly. But when we say we need this stuff for 6 weeks, that's the reason why.
Yes.
Because somehow within that 6 weeks, you've got to span a couple of decent listening sessions into these things, and it takes hours, absolutely hours and hours and hours. You can't get away from it.
No, you can't, and you will never be able to get away from it, William. You said something, listen to the equipment. Now, I get exactly the point that you were making, because you've now received a new piece of equipment and you've got to evaluate that piece of equipment. Part of critical listening is also when you stop listening to the equipment and you start listening to the music. That's the other bit. So if you start forgetting about the equipment kind of disappears out of the way of the music. And I don't think we are really there with a broad segment of the hi-fi reproduction and even recording equipment yet. But be that as it may, once that starts happening and you get so much into critical listening and you start experiencing this flow, then the equipment kind of disappears. That makes your job a lot more difficult at the end of the day as well. So I started asking this question that I opened with on our local forum, and the response was overwhelmingly, yes, music does contain that elusive energy, an esoteric property, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. I don't want to put labels on it because it may be different to everybody. It is very difficult to put substance to what this is. Here is the thing on all the responses. None of them were on a scientific level, the explanations given after the answer was yes. And all of them were on the emotional experience side of it. Nothing wrong with that, but that wasn't the intent of the question. And that's why I framed the question the way I did. Now, it may be that people feel affronted by the question because merely asking the question is now doubting the person's, the individual's experience and belief. And then they stop after the first sentence and they want to answer the question because, boy, you are wrong.
Very defensive, yeah. Sure.
Yes. And I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean, that's normal human behavior. But the point being, the question wasn't read in the spirit of what the question was asked in. It was interpreted differently. So some people mentioned cables makes a difference. Other people were talking about the harmonic how can I put it, the harmonics of music. So the information is contained in the harmonics. Other were talking about frequency response above 20 kilohertz when we start talking and playing back ultrasonic energies. So nothing wrong with any of those at all. The answers are not by definition wrong. They are, however, not answering the question that I originally asked in the forum. And the question was interpreted really as the response, the emotional, the person's response to the music, which is not the question that we asked with. But even so, that was the response on the forum. And however that may be, people seemed unperturbed by the fact that there may or may not be such energy produced by the live performances. So that didn't matter. That was discarded completely. However, that being said, we still do not know if in a live scenario where people are playing real instruments like an acoustic guitar or a piano or something to that nature, drums, whatever it may be, if there is any other energy produced apart from the pressure information, the pressure wave information that is being emitted by both voices from human beings as well as all the vibrations from the musical instruments, because all the musical instruments in some form or the other will just cause vibrations into air molecules, which will produce that. So we still don't know that. One thing we do know for sure is if there is silence, and I'm discounting noise, electronic noise and recording equipment and air molecule noise and microphone diaphragms and things like that. But if no music is played and nobody is singing, there is nothing to be recorded. So there can't be any of this other energy. by the very definition, because there is nothing produced. Well, as I said, apart from the electronic noise and the digital noise and all of those things in the recording chain, but that's not of importance. When the music playing starts, the moment that you start playing the piano or a singer starts singing, then obviously the vibrations are there and the pressure waves are emitted, and the microphone capsules will start recording it. Electronic instruments like an electrical guitar, synthesizers, even digitized digital pianos work on a completely different principle, and they are normally not recorded via microphone. They are normally via DI boxes or just directly plugged in line level, whatever the case may be. So that works a little bit differently. And yeah, I'm not gonna spend time on that. I don't think we need to. So if we start unpacking, then what does a recording do? We've now addressed the microphone a little bit. What does the recording do? The only thing a recording can ever do is record what the microphone has been transducing from the pressure wave energy into electrical energy. Okay, so that's the only thing that we can record. On top of that, let's try and understand if anything else is then produced, which goes back to the original question that I've asked. So let's focus a little bit more on microphones, just briefly, and this will be just some basics. I mean, we're not trying to design or re-engineer microphones or anything like that. So this is on a very, very high level. Sound is produced by vibrations. The vibrations disturb the microphone sensing diaphragm, really, and that disturbance is converted into an electrical signal, and that is transferred down a cable into some of the other type of digital recording medium. Nowadays, there's almost no analog recording happening anymore. So the only thing that the recording medium can record is whatever the microphone sends down the wire. There is nothing else that can capture, really, because we know a microphone can only capture whatever sound vibrations reaches it. If there are multiple sources of sound vibrations, it will record all the nulls and all the peaks and all the valleys of the pressure information as the live music and pressure waves interfere with each other destructively or constructively in the air. The microphone will do that. If you move the microphone capsule just slightly in space, 3D space, up, down, left, right, forward, backwards, it'll record a different signal because the pressure energy will be different at that other position. But we normally don't worry about the exact millimeter accurate placement of the microphone. The recording engineer will listen and he will reposition the microphone until he's happy with the sound that he actually receives. So now we know what reaches the transducer, what is transduced, and what is then captured, obviously, and recorded. So sounds, voices, noises, and music are all just vibrations. They create the pressure energy. The pressure energy is captured. Everything is encoded by the microphone diaphragm, and it's recorded. There is nothing known today apart from the pressure wave energy that the microphone can transduce. So that is the only thing. So whatever other energies there may or may not be has to be recorded via the microphone via pressure wave energy. We don't have the physical ability or a different type of transducer to record that live energy apart from the vibrations, which are pressure waves. Okay. So if we pause here for a moment, once again, I'm going to get back to this. If we think about the wave energy, now, once again, critical thinking is more important to critical listening and to the enjoyment and understanding than even what critical listening is to critical listening. So we got to think about these things.
That's for me. So we have to think.
We have to think to be able to listen and understand. If we want to offer an opinion, then obviously we need to understand, when we offer this opinion, did we think about all the technical things that should support whatever our opinion is. I'm a firm believer in supporting any opinion with fact. That's a fact. That's the whole approach that I've got.
I think what we should do is this podcast should be mandatory for every politician. Because it would cut down the length of debate by a factor of 1,000% like that.
The business of politicians is not that. The business of politicians is to convince you that they're always correct, even if they are not. No, they won't go down this road. But be that as it may. So one of the things that I picked up over many, many years in the past is there are people making this type of claim. They are offering this opinion out there on various forums and various magazines and various articles. And this has been ongoing over a long period of time now. Where exactly I came to learn of this in the first place and when I did, I can't recall. But it's been, I've been cognizant of this over a long period of time, and I could never understand it, which is part of the reason for this whole podcast series. So there are some very, very clever and very clued up design engineers that design audio hardware in the world, and they even harbor this opinion that there may be this esoteric energy that somehow passes through amplifiers and through the whole reproduction chain without us being able to understand it, measure it, or anything like that, because of the inability of those self-same engineers to explain why one amplifier or one set of speakers sounds different to another one. So this is what they offer to do that. Now, there is a guy by the name of Bascom H. King, which is very well known in the high-end audio design circles. He's been consulting to various companies like Infinity, which is one of the greats, and to of late PS Audio, Paul McGowan and his outfit, probably to the likes of Krell and to a number of others. It's immaterial who he has been consulting to, but he mentioned in an interview quite a number of years ago with Paul McGowan that another guy, Jeffrey Cook, which is also a very good design engineer of audio equipment, offered this as a possibility that some equipment will pass that mystical energy and other equipment may not pass it unchanged. They don't know how, they don't know why, but they believe that that is indeed the case. And they believe that their designs are of such a nature, well designed, well put together, that their equipment does allow this energy to pass through. Not all equipment does so, and not all equipment does so equally. Here is the thing. The latest and greatest PS Audio, it's a few years old, but the PS Audio signature amplifier, which is heralded as a very good amplifier, even by its competitors in the market, that was designed by Mr. King, and Paul and them, they produced that amplifier, and they believe that that is the epitome of hi-fi amplifiers. And that does pass this type of energy. So people revere this, not this particular amplifier, but amplifiers of this nature, designers and engineer that does the design work, and they subscribe to the notion that these guys know things that other engineers might not know, and they've got some type of skill that other people don't possess. But now, these guys have been designing reproduction equipment, not really recording equipment. So who's got the same skills designing the recording equipment which will allow this mystical energy to pass, if it is somehow recorded by a microphone? And let's assume for a moment that it is recorded. So if that equipment is not designed to the same standard, it won't pass this mystical energy anyhow. Something else to think about. So why is the answer to this question, at least in my eyes, Why is it of vital importance, you might ask? And it is because we can only record what was captured by the microphone. We can't record anything else. Impossible. That being said, William, at the end of the day, we expect our reproduction gear, like you have mentioned in the past, to be faithfully reproducing whatever it is being fed, not add anything and not take anything away from whatever it is that we are playing. Whatever music it may be, it must faithfully reproduce that at all times. We know equipment is flawed. They're not 100% perfect. Some of them are better than other. We did discuss in one of the past episodes that this is not about the quality. This is purely about being able to faithfully reproduce it. We understand there are differences, but that's not what we are covering.
Sure.
Things like electrical guitars, synthesizers, and other digital and electronic things are obviously captured completely differently. That's just an electrical signal that we are capturing. So I'm leaving that type of instrument out of here. This is only for instruments that are captured via microphone that I'm talking about here. So people's voices are always recorded via microphone. So that obviously is always included. We haven't found a digital connection yet. We're still waiting on Musk. We're still waiting on Mr. Musk to be able to maybe
plug us in.
So, alrighty, getting on with it. I've asked the question, why is this so vital to understand how microphones and recording processes work? It's like taking a picture. A picture is a snapshot in time. A recording, whatever a microphone captures, is also a recording snapshot in time, but spread over a period of time. So if you take a movie as an example, a flick, a film, that is 24 frames per second in the old traditional way, and nowadays 29 point whatever, or 60 frames or 50 frames or 25 frames per second that we record all the digital stuff with. And that is taking snapshots in a very methodical manner over a period of time. And that is what a microphone and digital recorders do, is they just take snapshots faithfully of whatever it is that reaches them over a period of time. So if we consider that the positioning of a microphone is somewhat important for the recording, and it doesn't normally move except if it is a vocalist and they have a handheld microphone, but the microphone will move with them, and it's normally very, very closely mic'd because it's on stage and there are foldback monitors and they have in-ear monitors. There's all sorts of funny things happening there, which we don't have to go into at all. Whatever reaches the microphone is what it will transduce into an electrical signal. It cannot do anything else. So we are wholly dependent on what the microphone does, and wholly dependent on the electrical signal for other types of instruments that actually get into the recording process. So that being a scientific fact, what a microphone can capture and convert, there is nothing, as I've stated already, that we understand today with the knowledge that we've got today and the instrumentation to be able to do measurements today. There are no such energy that we could find, that I could find anywhere, or anybody talking about that type of musical quantity outside of the engineering or inside the engineering community. There are obviously lots of engineers that are musicians. How they deal with this, I don't know. I haven't asked any one of them. That may be an interesting thing to ask a musician, amplifier designer, or some form of designer of digital or analog equipment in the hi-fi world that is also a musician, how they do that. I know there are people like that. There's a guy, I'll probably be shot for mentioning it, Ethan Weiner, which is a well-known critic. He is a long-time musician, but he has In his own words, he claims he has debunked any of this a long time ago. Same with cables. Cables don't make a difference according to him. And he's a well-known musician, but let's not get stuck into that. So the pressure waves is the only energy that moves from a live musician onto a microphone. There is nothing else that really is happening there that I could find, and nothing is documented. There are no proof for anything else at this point in time. So for the purposes of reproduction at home or anywhere else, in a car, or it doesn't really matter, but we're talking hi-fi, so let's use the home. We want to add as little coloration or as little modification and have a faithful reproduction, and we certainly don't want to take anything away from the recording. Most microphones' frequency response, reaches up to 16 kilohertz. There are a few that goes to 20 kilohertz. They normally start at about 40 hertz. Some starts lower. There are a few exceptions. Earthquake microphones is an example, just one. Measurement microphones, which are the technical measurement microphones, they're normally about 12 millimeters or even smaller capsule diameters to make it very, very light and very fast to respond. Some of them have frequency responses up to 50 kilohertz. So there are indeed microphones with a response capability above just what we listen to normally. And they are used in the musical recording industry. Some people will use it, but there is almost no talk amongst any of the artists about any of those types of microphones. I very, very seldomly see it, apart from some discussions on a few forums by hi-fi enthusiasts or audiophiles, whatever you want to call yourself. But that is the exception rather than the rule. Most microphones used up to 16 kilohertz. There's a steep roll-off in frequency from 16 kilohertz upwards. This particular microphone, and one of the reasons why I've got this, I've got others, some of them are up to 16. This particular one is 30 to 20 kilohertz. I can publish the graph for it. No big deal. But most microphones won't record any ultrasonic energy anyhow. It is cut out. Most reproduction formats don't reproduce anything. SACD, HECD, those things can, because their sampling frequency is above 48 kilohertz, so they can in actual fact do it, and some of them go to 70 or 100 kilohertz. They've got filters in that level. The real reason for the filters there is not necessarily to reproduce the ultrasonic frequencies. It is more just to prevent phase shift and coloration of frequencies below 20 kilohertz, really, to not be affected by the filters, because a filter has got the nasty habit of changing phases, and it'll reduce the stuff that it's passed, which gives an unwanted coloration and not a faithful capture.
Now, you said something interesting there, that on the mic that you're using at the moment, that your response is 30 to 20 kilohertz, right? And you said that there's a curve.
Yes.
Now, if that curve is not absolutely completely flat all along its operational range, you're going to have coloration of the actual recording influenced by the microphone itself.
Absolutely. And it's called the voicing of a microphone, just like the voicing of a speaker.
And within that coloration, and within different microphones, and within different recordings, and within different recording engineers who are putting this all back together again, so
there
back
is
to our engineers again.
Yeah.
The energy that we speak of, that's not recorded in the microphone, as far as we know it, is it possible that that's included within the peaks and troughs and the waves? That it's no, not from a technical point of view. I've talked myself out of my own argument straight away there. But isn't it interesting that the coloration of the microphone itself might influence the sound, to perceive it, that our emotional response, not our physical response or the technical response to it, but our emotional response might infer, hang on, there's something else here in this music. And maybe it's in these peaks and troughs of our emotional response versus the technical response that somewhere the truth lies, in terms of what guys are claiming they're hearing. And yes, I accept that this this dark art of hi-fi reproduction is part religion, part science. But when you've got the religious fanatic on the other side of the screen, there's no way you're going to convince them otherwise because they've heard it.
We don't need
That's
to
it.
convince him otherwise. We don't want
Yeah.
to convince him otherwise. We don't want to take away any of the enjoyment of anybody on as to what they enjoy and why they enjoy it. They've got the option to listen to the podcast or don't listen to the podcast. No ill feelings there at all. If they don't want to accept that we are unable to find anything to describe what they are hearing, either they are not hearing it, and it's unfair to tell somebody you're not hearing something because there's no way that we can prove that he's not or she's not hearing that. So that can't happen. But if they describe something that they are hearing, hopefully they can offer more than just the description and base it on some scientific fact. And that's not too much to ask. If you can't do that, do some critical thinking and come back and then discuss it in a manner where other people may be able to offer something to help us understand what you are hearing.
That sums it up succinctly. Couldn't put it better myself.
There we go. So if I now get to the crux of the matter, and that is the recording industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry worldwide. So if this is something that anybody, and there are thousands and thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, if not million or more engineers, recording artists, all of these people involved in this industry, by now they would have found something. That is just my opinion. Take note, opinion. I don't have any facts around that, but that is my opinion. So if they haven't been able to find anything and document it somewhere, I don't believe that that exists. So my opinion, once again, and this is based on all the facts that we are presenting here today, is that that esoteric energy or vibe does not really exist. The only thing that exists is people's emotional response to the music.
Yeah.
If that is the only thing that exists, and the amplifier and the reproduction chain reproduces fairly faithfully the source material to the loudspeakers that we listen to, that is entirely based on our emotional state and our emotional response to the music, then the reproduction chain can't have any influence on that whatsoever. That's the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't take away from your emotional enjoyment and your emotional response to anything. It doesn't take away anything. But that is then purely your emotional response to listening to the music that you like. Nothing else. So that then brings us to the next point I'd like to make, and that is that the reproduction chain equipment shouldn't be able to make an influence or have an influence on that emotional response. Does it have an influence on the quality of the reproduction? Yes, but not on your emotional response. What you listen to, what you hear, it will have a difference on that. If you take a mono amplifier and a mono reproduction chain, it's going to sound completely differently because there is no sound stage to speak of. Front to back, there may be a little bit, because remember, how close music or how close we place something on the sound stage is dependent only on the volume information or the relative volume information that's encoded in there. Right, so any sound that is created electronically, digital pianos, synthesizers, all of those things. Remember, synthesizer uses sine waves, square waves, sawtooths, triangular waveforms, and they manipulate those things to create their unique type of sound, which doesn't exist in nature, except when it's replayed, but that's then the speaker reproducing that. There's no other way that we can listen to it. But anyhow, that being said, if it's electronically, either analog or by digital means, because there are two ways we can do that as well, this directly recorded information is just electrical energy. There are no vibrations. So if people maintain that it's the live instruments, then only live instruments should be able to elicit that emotional response in people, and that is not the case. If you listen to synthesized music, let's use one of the very first synthesizers that was actually created, and I think Paul McGowan actually created that, was switched on Bach. It's one of the first synthesized pieces of music, and that then shouldn't elicit any emotional response if people say that emotional response is based on something passing through the system. Once again, that's my opinion. I might be wrong. I have been wrong many times in the past. Anybody can just ask my wife and she'll quickly inform me. He has been wrong a lot of times in the past. So,
yes.
So I might be wrong on this one.
I've lost count of the times I've been told that I was just wrong about something that I listened to. Like, I'm happy to be wrong, actually, because it gets boring being right all the time, and it's not right. It's always just an opinion that I'm expressing. So if you disagree with my opinion, I'm happy to hear your alternative. I really am.
I'll accept that. If people prove me wrong, I'll be glad, because I would have learned something.
Absolutely,
I would have learned something. Great. So we all do have emotions. We've discussed that. We all have convictions and the like, all of those things. We all respond differently to music. We've mentioned that a number of times. You like your type of music, jazz, trance, whatever they may be, that is completely acceptable. We're not trying to tell people you can't enjoy a bit of jazz or whatever it is that you do, or you should start enjoying rock concerts if you don't enjoy that. You don't have to. It's no skin of our noses in that respect. So our emotional responses will vary with music. It will vary with lots of things. That can vary when the two of us are talking and you get cross with me, and when cross gets here, my emotional response will change completely. My mood will change completely. So completely normal. Another point I'd like to make is, when we listen to reproduced music, we never know what the artists were using in the studio or at the time of recording. They may have used a digital piano from some manufacturer, and that may have been a sampling of a grand piano, Steinway, Yamaha, whatever the case may be. They may actually show in the music video a real piano of completely different nature, but that is not what is actually recorded. So when we had albums, this type of thing, in the past, sometimes on here, they actually showed us what the stuff was that was used. You'll have a big write-up. On some CDs today, we still get that. But in a lot of instances, this is not telling us how it was done, what was used, or any of that information. So we don't know if a digital sampling device was used in studio, although they may show something different on stage or at a typical music video, what they use. So we really honestly do not know what was actually utilized at the time of the recording. So we can't say if it should include this, because if everything is digital or even analog but recorded not via microphone, it's going to have a completely different sound to something that was recorded via microphone. Microphones, as I said, have voices. The design engineers that design these things, in this particular case, the Electro Voice RE27, they give it a voice, and they spend probably a year or something to that effect to dial in the voice, the characteristics of the response. There's a little bit of a droop at the bass and maybe a bump at 4 kilohertz to emphasize voices, or a high end to emphasize what is referred to as the air inside music, 16 kilohertz and above. All of these things play a part in what we listen to at the end of the day. We can't change that. There is no way of changing all of these things. And we don't necessarily understand what the recording and mastering engineers have been doing and what the artists have been using and doing. We don't know that for most of the music that we listen to nowadays. So where does this then leave us at the end of the day? We know what the microphones can record and can't record. We know that there are no scientific facts as far as any other energy apart from just the pure wave energy. And I have found no proof that anything is apart from just the vibrations of the musical instruments and the vocals are embedded and encoded into those pressure waves. I have found no evidence, so therefore I have to discount that there may be anything encoded at the recording side of things. So that means that there is nothing that can be reproduced at the reproduction side of things that is measurable. If it is not measurable, somebody needs to investigate and tell us how that actually happens. In my opinion, in other words, and this is the opinion of me and nobody else's opinion, backed by all the arguments that we've made in this episode and all the things that happened in the past episodes, all steer towards this, and that is, in my personal opinion, there is no ability to record anything other than the vibrational energy or the electrical signals, which means that the claim that there may be something passing through the reproduction claim, I am disputing that. It doesn't exist. In my opinion, I haven't been able to, in all my investigations, in all the work that I've done in the past, where I've been exposed to a multitude of these things on various levels, both on the electronic front as well as on many other fronts, this does not really exist. It is only the emotional response to the music that we like. We are not born with a like of this type of music or that type of music. That is something that is formed over our childhoods and over our lifetime, and it changes throughout time. And there may come something new along that we never heard before that we now enjoy.
And that again is the point that I think needs to be driven home with a sledgehammer, because it is a controversial statement, but the truth of it is that if you actually acknowledge what it is that you've said, it is always our emotional response to the music that colors what it is we're perceiving.
Yes.
When we're doing critical listening with our thinking caps on and trying to take that element of it out of the equation, yes, there's an argument to be made about the faithfulness of the recording as it was done. I find it very, very difficult to listen to new equipment with new music and obtain a reference from my stored reservoir of experience and knowledge between these clay hairs to be able to say whether a piece of equipment is better or worse than any other. And it's never my job to say something is bad or good. It's to point out where it's strong. If there are any weaknesses, to point those out. You make up your own decisions of whether those strengths are strengths in your ears or weaknesses in your ears that appears weaknesses in my ears. And that's just where we are in this little lot. So the emotional response that I get when I'm listening to music is based on, and I'm making notes as we go, you may be hearing me typing here in the background, is based on the fact that it's a reference to what I've heard before. And if the equipment is able to induce the same emotional response in me, then it's doing what it needs to do. And so it's actually a measure of how my response is to the music I'm listening on a system that I benchmark against. Not what was recorded.
No.
So
Never what.
as much as we're in the hands of the recording engineers, it's a case of the reference point is always the same recording and the same emotional response to it, and then the same critical listening response.
Where does this leave us then? In conclusion, we can all have different opinions. No opinion by definition is correct or incorrect, unless proven or disproven by fact. That changes the opinion. So, if you want your opinion to have some weight, back it up with facts. My personal opinion, there is no such property that can be recorded because microphones do not have the ability to record anything but pressure wave energy. Therefore, the reproduction chain doesn't have to reproduce any energy apart from the wave energy. There are important differences in gear. 100K versus a 10K versus a 1K amplifier will reproduce the quality of the sound differently. There is no disputing that. It is even measurable. Unfortunately, we've got no means to say if we measure X, Y, and Z on amp number 1 and we measure the same 3 properties on amp number 2, which one of the two will of necessity sound better or sound different. We do not have the tools to classify that yet. Think about how you describe an amplifier as warm or valve versus MOSFET amplifiers. There are huge differences in the describing of the sound of these things. The measurements are all done in exactly the same way, and those words between how we measure things and how we describe things are two completely different worlds almost. You won't find warm in any technical specification. You may find distortion in both. This, however, crystallizes the fact that one amplifier doesn't have this magical capability versus another or anything in the reproduction chain to reproduce something that I maintain is not being recorded in the first place. So forget about that. Not relevant. There are other things that are, but this property at least, not relevant. Decent equipment, and you can insert your own definition of decent here, should reproduce the sound faithfully. Don't add anything, don't take anything away. Therefore, I conclude by saying critical thinking is far more important to critical listening than what critical listening is to itself. Till next time.